Anyway, today I'm privileged to have Alan Rae with us, Sergeant Alan Rae. Alan lives in Vancouver. He was a South African, but he went up to Rhodesia and joined 10RR and later became a part of the intelligence service. And so, Alan, without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today.
I wanted to tell the story about a territorial soldier because I think we've shown all the brave hearts and the courageous people like yourself and Hannes and all these other helicopter pilots and jet pilots, many of whom I know personally, by the way. Hugh Slatter is a good friend of mine, and he was the Air Vice Marshal. So, it was one of those things where I just wanted to tell a territorial soldier story. But, there was a young fellow who worked with me by the name of Mike Michelle. And I just want to pay a little tribute to Mike because Mike is dead. And nobody's going to ever tell a story about Mike Michelle. And he worked with me at a company UDC in Rhodesia. And he was out on patrol and he hit a landmine. He was in the back of a Land Rover and the tire was filled with water, went up in the air and came down and landed on him and killed him. And nobody will ever remember Mike Michelle. In fact, I had to really dig deep last night because I just wanted to make mention of him and how proud I am of the young territorial soldiers like myself. And you'll see as I go through what I went through. I mean, I came to Rhodesia from South Africa, and because I didn't believe in apartheid. And so, I had just arranged for a move to Rhodesia, and no sooner had I arrived than they said, hang on a second, a corporal from the South African Army, because I was in 5 South African infantry, and I despised apartheid. So I left and I went to Rhodesia. And, the thing about moving to Rhodesia was it's a country of great freedom, great independence, great opportunity. And they used to have Playboy because we didn't have that in South Africa. And they sold beer on Sundays. And so it was a country of great opportunity. And I arrived there not knowing anything about the country. I got a job very early and I worked at a company called UDC Rhodesia Limited. And I rose through the ranks very quickly because I worked hard. I was an ex-banker in South Africa. No formal training at university or anything like that. And they asked me to go down to the Lowveld. I worked in Gwelo, Kwekwe, and I sub-managed branches while the guys were away. And they saw talent, so they said, okay, we want you to go down to Fort Victoria and open the branch there and really set something up for us. And that covered the Lowveld, which is Triangle, Chiredzi, Buffalo Range, and all that sort of stuff. So, I went down there and I really thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. I had a Peugeot 404 and I'm driving around in the middle of nowhere. And I never knew at the time that the tours were actually there. I didn't know that. So I'm driving around the bush and I go and visit these farmers. All my farm clients were obviously very remote in the bush and whatnot. So I'd go and visit these guys and it was an amazing experience. And I just kept talking to them and meeting with them. And the bank managers at Barclays Bank in Chiredzi and Fort Vic, they gave me great opportunities. So, but all the time I'm driving around these dirt roads, unarmed, completely unaware of what was going on. And only later on did I realize that the tours were active in that territory at the time. But nonetheless, I got away with it and no problems at all, and everything was fine. And then they of course 10RR called me and said, okay, you've got to go for call-ups. So in those days I was under 10RR, so we were up to Kariba mainly. I don't know why there, but in the valley as well. And we were down there and we would go on patrols. And you've got to remember, I was just a young South African boy, grew up in high school. I never ever went to army parades or anything like that. I had to learn how to march and all that stuff. And suddenly I'm in the middle of this war. But I had this incredible group of people. Reggie Rice, who since passed away, a great friend. He was my sergeant. And Reggie said, Alan, you're my corporal. follow me. And we did incredible things. We were all over the place. And on one patrol, we were down in the valley, and we were walking through this buffalo grass, and this tall grass, and this buffalo came and charged Reggie and hit him right in the chest. And I jumped out of the way and I screamed, and the machine gunner opened up. He was one behind me, and we blasted this thing. We weren't supposed to kill animals, as you know, but it was Reggie or the animal. So we haven't faced court martial after that. But we were blessed to have Reggie alive and the animal dead. That was basically it. And we learned about things like when you were on ambush. We didn't know anything about ambush. So you lie on the ground and everything else, and they tie a string and they're doing this. And if a guy started to snore, you woke him up. But, unlike you guys who were professional soldiers, we didn't know about these things. So we had to learn. I remember the one guy snoring and the other guy clapped him and he clapped the other guy. Next thing, there's a bit of a fight going on. But it was amazing. But down in the Zambezi Valley, and I was talking to some friends of mine the other day. They were down at Mana Pools and whatnot. And they were just saying what a beautiful place it was and gorgeous and all that. And I said, when we were down in the valley, we didn't see any animals. We were looking for the other guys, and it was one of those things that were, the stark contrast of the two things was quite unreal. Anyway, um, one of the one of the troops that I was working with, we were on patrol, and I would always position myself in the center and then put my four guys in the stick around me, 3 or 4 guys in the stick. And I'd always pull out my book to, you had to send messages and all that sort of stuff. And the one guy said, "Hey, Sarge, what are you looking at now?" Because I'd been promoted. He said, "What are you looking at there? Is that a picture of a girl?" And I said, "No, no, it's taking a page out of Time magazine." And it was a gin and tonic ad with an ice cold glass. And I said, "Look at this. It's keeping me sane." Because, you become a little boss before, you know what I mean? Anyway, one of my guys, we were there in the valley, and one night, and a hyena came in and stood on his chest, and he basically bit the guy's jaw off like this. And we had to get him at the middle of the night, get a truck and get him up to the road, and then da 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 da, and got him out. But those are the realities of things that people don't understand. I mean, we were in the bush. This was wild country. So it was kind of an unreal existence. But again, we weren't trained in that. We didn't know what the hyenas were going to come and do that to us, and all of those things that went on. But then we moved over to Kariba, and I led a patrol down the valley, and we were encountering a lot of crocodiles. And so I said to the guys, I'm uncomfortable with this because these crocodiles, and you know it better than anybody else, they move so quickly that you've got to be very, very aware of what you're doing. And I was seeing more and more of them, and they're big. And the Zambezi River, as you know, the Zambezi, the great Zambezi. So I said, okay, I'm going to lead the patrol up the cliff and get out of the valley, and we'll go from there. Well, going up the valley, I'm terrified of heights myself, and you're leading your patrol. And I went up and I went up and I went up, and I basically just made it to the top. And my machine gunner, who's a hell of a good guy, he grabbed me and pulled me to the top. But at that stage, I'd had heat fatigue had set in, and I was walking into trees and all those things. Anyway, they cleared an LZ, and they came in, and they brought a chopper, and they took me to Kariba Hospital, and I was heat stroke, and I was casevaced out of there, and I was intensive care for, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, IVs and one thing and another. And anyway, they said, okay, we're going to put you on light duty. So they made me guard commander of Kariba Dam Wall. Well, if you look at Kariba Dam Wall and what it symbolizes and the size of that wall, it's an enormous job. And I used to go down every day, twice a day, down into the thing, and you see these great big turbines. You go down the elevator, and we were this side, and the other guys were on the other side, and nobody walked across the wall in those days anyway. So it was really it was an experience second to none, because this huge volume of water held by this huge wall, and I was in charge of it. It was like, wow. Anyway, so that was kind of like that. And then I came back to Salisbury, and a friend of mine suggested that I should join Rhodesian Intelligence, which I did. So I spent a fair amount of time adjusting, and you get clearance and all of that stuff. And so we had, I was sent down to the valley on my own, and there were 2 RAR soldiers there, and we billeted, the three of us together, and we were basically there to try and gather intelligence while we were in there. And then the South African police came storming through there without permission, hit a landmine, and we had all sorts of cuck all over the place. And I had brought 12 bottles of beer, 12 quarts of beer, and I intended to share those with my two African RAR troops, and we'd have one every Friday night. Well, of course, with the excitement and the adrenaline, and one thing and another, and this landmine going off, and helicopters arriving. So this South African policeman in the helicopter, he said, "Is there any beer here?" I said, "Well, yeah, I've got beer." So I gave him one. He popped it off with his bayonet, and he drank it. And I said, "Geez, how can you drink warm beer like that?" He said, "If you want a cool beer," he says, "dig a hole 4 feet deep. Put the beer in the bottom, put some straw, put some soil, put some straw, put some soil, and then put some petrol over the top." Well, of course, petrol, we valued that with our lives, and throw a match in. And I never studied science when I was at school. I didn't pay attention. He said, what will happen is it'll evaporate so quickly. When you actually lift the beer bottle out, it'll be frozen cold. Well, as the chopper's taking off, we put all 11 bottles in the ground, in the hole, cut some, put soil, put some petrol, blew, and the whole bloody thing blew up. It was like a mortar going off. And I looked down in this blackened hole, and here's my 11 beers left, and the only one left was all of blown except this one, and it was fizzing out the top, and I got the radio, and I was calling this guy all names as you can imagine. Well, of course, Jock got onto me and said, "Who's that? Radio protocol, radio protocol." But, I was there for another 10 weeks or whatever it was. No beer now, I tell you, it was bad. But anyway, we ended up at Kotwa with Rhodesian intelligence, and I spent a lot of time up there in Yamapanda and in that area. And we were assigned. There was two of us, two white guys, two RAR guys, and these RAR guys, I cannot tell you how proud and privileged I am to have worked with the RAR. They were simply the best. They looked after us like babies. I mean, we were just, white guys with, I mean, God, we were, businessmen with suits on, and we were running around and whatnot. And we had Teaspoon and Chagunda. And these two guys, one was the corporal and the other, and I was the sergeant, so I was ranking, but I always relied upon them. And we were driving along the road one day, and there were a couple of herd boys ahead of us, and they were acting suspiciously. And Teaspoon said, "Stop." And when they say anything, you do. So I stopped immediately, and they jumped off and chased these herd boys across the field and cuffed them about the head a bit and whatnot to get intelligence. And the herd boys came back and they pointed, and right underneath my left tire where I was driving in the dirt, there was this, and we blew it, and there was this landmine, supercharged. And had I gone another 6 inches, I would have detonated this thing. And I thought, thank God for those RAR, because they were so alert, so attuned to what was going on. It was amazing. So it was, it was amazing. But there, then we look at the lighter side. We always try and find some humor and levity in life. And there was a bar there, and it was owned by a guy called Jimmy. So we were kind of like, looking at this thing. And when we came in after patrol, the first thing we did was go to the bar. We never went back to the base at Kotwa. And my two RAR guys, I walked in, I said, "Jimmy, 2 beers each for my 2 quarts of beer for my boys, and a pack of cigarettes for each of them. Thank you." And then he said, "What will you guys have?" And we said, "Well, we'll have gin and tonics with lots of ice." And he poured the gins and the tonics and whatnot. And he's a white guy. I mean, he's just in the middle of nowhere. And he poured the gins and tonic, and then he put 1 cube of ice out of this blue plastic thing in each glass. And I said, "Jimmy, we want ice." And he said, 1 cube each. And I heard this rifle cock next to me, my corporal, my white corporal. He said, "Jimmy, I think the sergeant said ice, lots of it, because you're in the bush. It's hot as hell." So we had that. We used to follow spoor. We weren't trained for it, but the RAR guys let us do it. And they really did a great job, very protective of us. And we came upon a couple of patrols leaving the country. They'd been in contacts, and there was a lot of bandages and blood and on the bandages. And we actually tried to pursue them and call in. But with these big granite copies, as you know, it interfered with the radio. So you could never really get good comms unless there was a satellite going overhead. And we had that, but it was kind of like one of those things where I'm glad we didn't find them, because we certainly weren't trained for it. But we were full of piss and vinegar and get out of my way. And I've got an R1 or FN, whatever it was. And it was go-go, but I've been involved. I'm so proud of what you guys are doing, Hannes, yourself, and the rest of your team, because you're preserving a legacy that if you guys didn't do this, our children wouldn't know what was happening in Rhodesia and how we went about it. And people must remember we were fighting for our country. We weren't fighting in Vietnam or somewhere else. We were fighting for our country. And I think it's so important to know the bravery of the soldiers, the airmen, the nurses, the families, the farmers. I mean, the farmers, they were amazing. So I'm so proud to have been a part of that.